The food managers working for key members of the royal family are only known from the 7th century, when the establishment of these royals seemed to have expanded considerably. Also, the reference to the winemaster of the new house stems from a legal record dating from the reign of Assurbanipal or later, based on the fact that the earliest datable attestation of a food manager qualified as of the palace points to the reign of Sargon II, a time when also the other institutional affiliations are tested for the first time. One might conclude that at the latest, in the second half of the 8th century, the kitchen managers were no longer restricted to the royal household, and their number increased further in the 7th century. However, since we lack substantial data from before the second half of the 8th century, and it is likely that large establishments such as the Assur Temple were staffed with kitchen managers already in the early Neo-Assyrian times, this observation is to be treated with caution. Still, the absence of comparable qualifications for officials concerned with one specific type of foodstuff, including grain, is significant, and it seems that these men were usually only active in the royal households, either as a single representative of their office or as one among multiple office holders, as in the case of the chiefs of granaries who were assigned to different places from the reign of Adad Nirari III on. The wine-masters of the new house from late Neo-Assyrian times is perhaps an indicator of a continuous process of specialization within the royal household due to its increase in size and complexity over the centuries. As a consequence of the food managing offices having more than one representative at a time within or in addition to the royal household, we have to reckon with a hierarchical formation of holders of the same office, headed by the main office holder of the royal household. Comparably high density of kitchen managers employed in different spheres is likely due to the fact that institutional households were equipped with facilities for the processing and preparation of food that were staffed with skilled personnel such as cooks, confectionists, and brewers. The larger these facilities were, and the more personal they deployed, the higher is the likelihood that individuals were chosen from among them to preside over their professional section. Hence, at first sight, these people might be regarded as, for instance, the chefs de cuisine, as their titles suggest. However, the reality was different. The chief cook and the chief confectioner of the royal household do not seem to have been occupied in the palace kitchen and the palace confectionery respectively, but rather they organized the foodstuff that were needed by the working cooks and confectioners. In the case of the cooks, this involved the meat of domestic animals, and in the case of the confectioner, they were occupied with fruits and spices. With the chief cook, this developed to such an extent that he was responsible for the general management of livestock, whether needed for sacrifices, consumption, or work as drought animals. The chief cook, Sa Elu, even became Oponym in the year 620, a function which was usually reserved for high state officials, but was fulfilled also by some court officials in the late Neo-Assyrian times. The other types of kitchen managers do not occur in particular connection with the royal household, nor do they seem to have developed a similar degree of abstraction and complexity. They were more hands-on. As far as one can tell from the sources, the chief baker and chief brewer and the chief oil presser seem to have borne responsibility primarily from the preparation and provision of bread, beer, and oil, mainly sesame oil, rather than from the organization of the ingredients needed. Also, the discrepancy between the literal meaning chief oil presser Rab Iti and oil master Rab Samni supports the impression that the latter managed the acquisition, storage, and distribution of oil, and the chief oil presser, as head of the oil pressers, was liable for the production of the oil pressing craft and may have even worked as an oil presser himself. Likewise, the storage of grain, which was central for the chief bakers and the chief brewers' work, was the responsibility of the chief of granaries and the Rab Danabati. One would also assume a similar distribution of responsibilities between the fruit master and the spice master on the one hand, and the chief confectioner on the other hand. They all occur in the same administrative document recording allocations of tribute to court personnel. Thus, they were active at the same time. Judging by the developed state of the office of chief confectioner, he was perhaps responsible for the acquisition of fruits and spices needed by the confectioners, while the two food managers managed the same commodities for other uses, such as raw consumption or the manufacture of perfumes. Although this is highly speculative, the responsibilities of the kitchen managers and the other food managers in any case, to a certain extent, complemented each other. Comparing the range of food served at the banquet of Assurbanipal II with the types of foodstuffs the food managers were concerned with, the management of the most important component of the elite menu, including grain, meat, and wine, was undertaken by separate officials. In the following, we will take a closer look at selected food managing offices in order to gain a better understanding of the activities of the food managers in connection with the acquisition, transport, storage, and distribution of the foodstuffs for the benefit of the royal household, inevitably including also deliveries to the temple. Since the chief of granaries, the chief cook, and the wine master are all comparatively well attested among the food managers, and since each of these offices represents one of the categories of food managers established above, they are the most suitable candidates for such an examination.